Well, good afternoon. I'm Rick Wilson. I'm the director of Scientia, and I'd like to thank you for attending today's lecture. This year's series is entitled PANOPLY. I take the meaning to be a broad tapestry of talent, and the aim of the series is to showcase the many different streams of research and ideas here at Rice. Scientia members hope that this is going to encourage cross-school fertilization.
Our topic today is origins. Where did it all come from? We'll hear 3 talks from 3 distinguished speakers. First up, we have Mustafa Amin, Assistant Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Rice University. He'll report on our current understanding of the origin of structure in our cosmos. He'll take us from the Big Bang to the formation of stars and galaxies. Next, we have Andrea Isella. He's an Assistant Professor of Physics and Astronomy here at Rice, and he'll discuss the origin of planets, how those like our own might have formed around stars like our sun. Last up, Luay Nakhleh is a J.S. Abercrombie Professor of Computer Science, Professor of Biosciences, and the Department Chair of Computer Science at Rice. He'll explore the challenges of inferring the origins of life on Earth from molecular data. So to start us off, here's Mustafa Amin.
So let me start with something that hopefully we can all agree upon. We are here, right? So we're all okay with this, that we are here. Yeah? But where is here? So our cosmic address is, has quite a few things we have to say about it. So we're here in this room. Our planet is nothing but the 3rd rock from the sun in our solar system. And our solar system is but a tiny speck in this huge galaxy of ours, which has about 100 billion stars like our sun. Looking further away from our galaxy and looking really far out, we might find galaxies that are sort of in their infancy and maybe learn something about what our galaxy was like at that time. So let's try to look further out from our galaxy. To look further out, let me first show you what the galaxy actually looks like to us. It doesn't look like this. We are inside it. It looks something like this, right? On a regular night in Houston, this is what the sky looks like. Now, what I want you to concentrate on is not quite the regions that are bright, but I want you to concentrate on some region far away from the bright regions, okay? Some region where you can see no stars. Let's say you pick a region where you can't see any stars. Let's take this square. This is a square region I'm picking. What is the size of this region that I'm picking? Just to give you a sense of scale, in terms of size on the sky, this is roughly this size compared to the size of the full moon. Okay, so it's a pretty small region of the sky that I'm picking. You, of course, can't see anything inside this square, but that's because you don't have the special glasses that I'm wearing. Okay. If you wear my special glasses, which have written on them Hubble, okay, and you look through this, at this patch, this is what you would see. This amazing picture that you see from the small patch of the sky is actually an incredible image which is representative of what you would see in any patch that you picked. Almost every smudge of light that you see here is a galaxy like our own, with about 10 to 100 billion stars in them. If you notice, this one looks kind of spirally like our own. Okay? This picture, if you look closely, there are some galaxies in there that you are seeing light from, which was emitted about 13 billion years ago. Remember, light from the center of our galaxy was 25,000 light years ago. That's all it took. It took 25,000 years. Some of these galaxies, we are looking as they were 13 billion years ago. So we are looking pretty far back in the past and learning something about the infancy of our own galaxy. Rice has had, by the way, a role in this, where Bob O'Donnell had played an important role in sort of the early stages. Bob O'Donnell had played an important role in the early stages of the Hubble Space Telescope, which made this image possible. Now, we're greedy. This is all fine. We can look back 13 billion years. But I want to know what happened before this, okay? Even before this time. We want to talk about origins. We want to look further back. So now I'm going to show you an image of the universe. This is 13 billion years ago. I'm going to show you an image of the universe about 14 billion years ago. So the oldest stuff is 13 billion years. I want to go even further back, 14 billion years. This is what the universe looks like. Of course, the color is not quite right, but this is pretty much what it would look like. And most of the light coming to you is coming in the microwave frequency. I wouldn't blame you if your reaction was this. Okay? That looks pretty boring. That was such a beautiful image with galaxies in them, with beautiful structure. And now you go further back and it looks blah. Okay? But I want to convince you this is a really exciting picture that I've just shown you. The light that we are receiving in the microwave band, is really light coming to us from the time that the first atoms formed. You might have heard that the universe is expanding, and as it expands, it cools. There's a time in the history of the universe, about 400,000 years after the beginning, where the universe cools enough that atoms start forming, and light is free to travel towards us. So this light we are seeing is really light from that period of time. And it's bringing us a picture of the universe when it was about 14 billion years old, 14 billion years ago. This 400,000 years means nothing compared to this 13.8 billion years. Okay? So this is really a tiny fraction of the age. Again, in this picture, rice has had a pretty important role to play. In fact, the people who discovered this first light, now called the cosmic microwave background, one of the people there, Wilson here, was an undergrad at Rice. For this work, Penzias and Wilson were awarded a Nobel Prize, but Wilson did his undergraduate here in 1957. All right, so we have this beautiful image, but you must admit it looks a little bit boring. So we've been hard at work in trying to refine this image of the first light that we got. We've refined in two ways. We've tried to look at the different intensity of light from different parts of space and tried to see if there was any variation. And we also improved the angular resolution, that is, trying to see features on smaller and smaller angular scales in the sky. Over the years, we have gone from the image that we got from first, we got a pretty blah image, no real spatial information. Then we got some spatial information with the help of the COBE satellite, then with WMAP in 2001, and then with the Planck satellite. You can see an improvement in the resolution. A change from blue to red here is about a change of 1 part in 100,000. Okay? So it's a pretty small deviation from red to blue here. So very small changes in sort of temperature of light coming from one side of the sky to the other. But nevertheless, there is a variation that we can see. Here is, in some ways, the latest image that we have of this. This is from the Planck satellite, and this is the map from 2018. Sorry, you can't see this very well, but the variation, as I said, from one point to the other, red to blue, is about 1 part in 10 to the 5. This is false color. And the scale here is about a degree on the sky. So now we have looked back at what the universe was like about 14 billion years ago. We see this pattern in the first light. So obviously the question arises, what gave rise to this pattern? Okay? And how is this connected to galaxies and stuff that I'd shown you before? There is a really nice and elegant idea that explains these patterns. This elegant idea is that you start very early in the history of the universe, and all you have at that time is sort of a plain vanilla universe, but there's this jitter in space and time. This jitter is present because of the theory of the very small, which is quantum mechanics, which says that there has to be some level of jitter. You can't have perfectly smooth state. This jitter is not part of this elegant idea. This we have known for a century almost. The new thing in there, which was proposed, is that if you then give the universe a large growth spurt, where the universe expands really rapidly, then this expansion in the very early universe, in a tiny fraction of a second in the early universe, acts as sort of a cosmic amplifier. It takes this tiny quantum jitter that's present and blows it up to cosmological scales, to really large scales that we can see in the sky. This idea is called inflation. Okay? It's an elegant idea. As I'll show, there's some evidence for it, but it's still not on the same level as sort of the standard model of particle physics or the stuff that we can test in the laboratory. Okay? Still somewhat speculative. But the idea has a lot of resonance with me in particular, and many people in the community, because it connects this very small scales to what we see on the sky on the larger scales. Just to sort of say, this expansion happens in a tiny fraction of a second, but the patterns that we are seeing here are imprinted much later. It's 400,000 years later. Does this idea of quantum jitter responsible for these patterns, does it have merit? Okay. And I would argue that it does. Okay. So this is a quantitative representation of these patterns that we see in the sky. The blue points are the data that captures the quantitative aspects of this pattern. The red line is the theory that includes this early growth spurt of inflation and these quantum fluctuations, this quantum jitter that I started with. Hopefully you can all tell that this is a pretty good fit. Okay. There are other ingredients in there. It's not just this early growth spurt. Nevertheless, without the growth spurt, this wouldn't fit as well. Okay. It would fit pretty poorly. For the engineers in here, even though I don't say it explicitly, this is really the Fourier transform of this map. Okay. That we have, or more precisely, it's the Fourier transform of the correlation function of this map. All right, so this idea of this jitter giving rise to these patterns is pretty good. So we've gone to explaining what gave rise to these patterns in the first light. I haven't yet explained to you how this translates into the galaxies and stuff that we see. Okay? And all you have to do to get from here to there is to let gravity do its job. Okay? What is the essence of gravity in this context? Gravity makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. So it will take regions that are slightly more dense. These tiny deviations in temperature also correspond to tiny deviations in density. So it takes tiny overdensities and makes them more dense. It takes tiny underdensities and makes them even less underdense. Okay. Here is a computer simulation of this process at work. Okay. And you'll see this almost homogeneous distribution of particles in there become much more clumped and clustered as you go on. So this is the way galaxies are forming, is just gravity doing its thing. Okay. It's making structures form, starting off with these initial inhomogeneities that were present, which came initially from the quantum jitter. Here is a snapshot of this with slightly more colors imposed on it. The yellow stuff that you see is where our galaxies and clusters of galaxies are. And then you see this filamentous structure, right? So this is sponge-like structure in black. This is something I haven't talked about, but you should ask me about it. Okay? This is dark matter. Okay? It's black here, but we can't actually see it. But we infer its presence in other ways. Okay? But you see this filament-like structure that must form if this process is happening because of gravity. If you want to think about why this filament-like structure arises, just take a sheet of cloth, try to pinch it at two ends and lift it up. As you lift up two peaks, you'll see a ridge developed in the middle. Okay? This is sort of how mountain ranges have ridges in the middle. Okay? This is why these high-density peaks, which are at the nodes, have filaments connecting them. By the way, this picture is in the scale of hundreds of millions of light years. I told you that this is the way galaxies are forming. Let me zoom in on one of those bright regions and show you a simulation. This is by the illustrious TNG collaboration. It focuses on one of the galaxies as part of the larger simulation. And what I'm going to show you, the density of light, the density of colors that you see there is basically about how much gas there is. It's about the density of gas. Okay. So it's a very dynamical process, this formation of galaxies under the influence of gravity. Okay. This is stuff falling into the nodes that you saw. You notice, you can see what the scale is up over there. You can see sort of how many billion years have passed after sort of the first light came about. And this is a zoom in of what's going on at the center. Hopefully you can already see some spirally structure that is coming about. It's going to slow down in the middle for a second, and then it's going to try to show you the structure a bit. So this is sort of tracing the formation of a galaxy under the influence of gravity and the rest of the physics that we know in there. Let me see if I can. See, it's going to rotate it around to just show you the structure of the galaxy face on. Okay? And you can see this spirally structure emerging. And then it's going to continue running forward to see how this continues, this formation of the galaxy continues on as more and more stuff falls in. So this is roughly how our own Milky Way galaxy would have formed. I also showed you from the computer simulation sort of the sponge-like distribution pattern of galaxies and so on, and we mapped this out observationally as well. Here we are just mapping out where the galaxies are, and this is the reason it's a cone is the observational strategy that you need to avoid our galactic center partly. And you see the same pattern, and it's quantitatively consistent with what we generate from our computer simulations as well. All right. So I've hopefully given you some sense of how we get to our galaxies, both in terms of individual galaxies and the distribution of galaxies, starting with quantum fluctuations, going through this cosmic amplifier called inflation, forming patterns in first light, gravity taking over, and forming galaxies. This picture is quite elegant. And recently, credit was awarded to Jim Peebles, who played a major role in putting this whole picture together. He won the Nobel Prize this year for his work in putting part of this picture together. So you might, hopefully I haven't left you the impression, but maybe you're left with the impression that we're done. We've simulated the universe sort of from the earliest phase to today. And obviously we are not, okay? And I should say that, otherwise I won't have a job. So we are not done yet. Okay? So this idea of this early growth spurt, how does it fit into the rest of physics? We don't fully understand. Okay? We don't understand how this inflation began in the first place very well. And what happened before that, we again don't have a detailed understanding of. We have ideas, but not a detailed understanding or well-tested understanding. Initially, I had planned to talk also about not just the origin of structure, but the origin of matter as well. And you can ask me more about it, how that fits in here. Okay, that's something that still we are working on. The nature of dark matter I briefly flashed, again, something we don't understand. And even things that we know about regular physics, there is so much complexity in there that even if we know the laws that govern them, we can't fully explain the structure that emerges. Okay? There's a lot of detail that is still missing in here. And needless to say, there is a lot of not just theoretical effort, but a lot of observational effort that's also underway to sort of probe these mysteries further. Things from looking at the cosmic microwave background, or the first light, to the first stars, to using particle colliders to understand the structure of matter that relates to the early universe as well. And more recently, also the discovery of gravitational waves, ripples in space-time, that along with light could also carry information towards us, both from the contemporary universe, but also from the very earliest instances in the universe. Right? I am to the end. Let me leave you with this slide. So this is sort of a cartoon version of the history of the universe, going from the very earliest growth spurt called inflation, all the way to the formation of galaxies. What I have left out in here is when in this process and how planets like our own and the solar system came into being, and that will be presented by the next speaker, Andrea.
Well, thank you for coming, and as Mustafa says, it's really a pleasure. And so what I'm going to talk to you for 10, 12 minutes today is about what we understand about formation of planets and how we study this topic here at Rice in particular. So going from cosmological and galactic scale down to the scale of our planet, our solar system, you might not think about that, but until about 30 years ago, the only planetary system known in the universe was the solar system, okay? So for many centuries, since the beginning of modern physics and modern astronomy particularly, the solar system was our only example, which means that all the theories about formation of planets are really rooted in what we know about the solar system. And if you know physics, you know that generally having one single experiment, one single example is not generally very good things to have, because you don't know how general this can be. Particularly the solar system has an interesting feature where you have rocky planets close to the sun, and giant planets farther out, where Mercury is the smallest planet and Jupiter is the largest planet with a mass of about 300 times the mass of Earth. So this picture changed radically from the beginning of 1990, when there was a huge effort in trying to discover planets around stars outside the solar system. And this is challenging, and so you need some sophisticated technology. And only in 1995, using Doppler effect, we were able to detect the first planet around a star like the Sun. And the people that made this discovery are shown here, Michel Mayor and Didier Queloz, that were awarded the Nobel Prize of Physics this year. In recognition of, so they discovered the first planet, but as you can see, the amount of planet discovered increased almost exponentially, right? And this is because we have space telescope like the Kepler satellite or the TESS satellite that are really sophisticated and can do very precise measurement of the presence of planet around other stars. So nowadays, in 2019, the number of planets goes up every day, pretty much, discovered around the solar system. As you can see, there are more than 4,000 planets known outside the solar system. And one of the main discovery, when you put together all these new detection, you can try to visualize the properties of this planet in many ways. But one of the main characteristics is the striking diversity in physical properties. So some of these planets are very different from the planet we have in the solar system. These two histograms here show the number of planets as a function of the distance between the planet and the host star. So in the solar system, Earth is at 150 million kilometers from the Sun. This is the definition of astronomical units. So this is 1, where Earth is. Mercury is a fraction of an astronomical unit. And the farther out planets are between 20 and 30 astronomical units. Then Pluto is sitting here as well. And then there is a large population of what we call dwarf planets and small rocks in the outer part of the solar system. But you see, there are a huge amount of planets that are very, very close to their host star, which was surprising. We have nothing like that in the solar system. And there is also a large amount of planets that are much more massive than Jupiter. So this is the mass of the planet now. Jupiter is here. As I say, Jupiter is about 300 times more massive than Earth. There are planets that are 10 times more massive than Jupiter. And then when the planets get to about 15 times more massive than Jupiter, then we call them stars, okay? Because then the mass is high enough that they can fuse hydrogen in their core. But if you want to understand the formation of planets, any model that you can come up with must be able to understand why there is such a huge diversity. Another important point is, can any of these planets host life as we know it, meaning that physical conditions similar to Earth? So a challenge for the future is really to follow up on any of these planets, trying to understand whether they may be habitable. So, however, here we are talking about formation of planets, and I'm an observer, which means I want to look at the sky, the universe, and try to understand how planets form. If you want to solve this question, you need to find in the universe a region where planets and stars are forming today. The solar system is 4.5 billion years old, so by studying the solar system, it's very difficult to extrapolate back in time by 4.5 billion years and understand how the solar system came to be. Instead, we can look at star-forming region like this one, which is the Orion Nebula. And by the way, I have the same glasses of Mustafa for some reasons. Right? So they come, I think they are kind of common glasses. So this is, again, a picture of the Hubble Space Telescope. And so all you see is gas and dust that comes together in these structures that are much smaller, on much smaller scale than what Mustafa was saying. And the Hubble Space Telescope allows you to zoom in and find objects like this one. These are protostars or protoplanetary systems. So what you see here is really a kind of newborn star, the bright spot at the center, surrounded by this dark ring of material. We call this circumstellar disk or protoplanetary disk. This is a rotating disk of material that is the reservoir for formation of planets. And then you see this kind of tadpole shape, which is a primordial envelope that has been collapsing and now is illuminated by bright star at the center of the Orion Nebula, which is called the trapezium. By the way, this is a beautiful object that you can see pretty much in the naked eye, even from Houston in winter. But if you have a small telescope, it shows up very well. OK, so these are the places where planets form. Unfortunately, this picture, you can see, you cannot get many details. So we want to be able to zoom in even farther and see if we can have any evidence of planet formation or study the physics that leads to planet. How do we do that? It's very challenging. And the reason that it's very challenging is that these objects are very small in terms of angular size. The full moon is about half a degree, same as the sun. These objects have an angular extent of a second of an arc, which is about 2,000 times smaller than the full moon. So you need a very, if you have some physics knowledge, there is this thing called diffraction of light. So the angular resolution that the telescope can provide is limited by the law of physics to the wavelength divided by the size of the telescope. Meaning, if you want to have very small pixel in the sky, very high angular resolution, you need very big telescopes. And only in the last 20 years, we were able to build telescopes that are big enough that allow us to take images better than these. Okay? So the telescope I use, and most of the people in my community use, is a weird telescope. It's actually a collection of telescopes. It's called an interferometer. And the most powerful interferometer we have on Earth is the Atacama Large Millimeter and Submillimeter Array, or ALMA in short. Is in Chile, 5,000 meter elevation, because you want to get rid of as much atmosphere as you can, because atmosphere is this opaque screen that doesn't allow you to see properly objects in the universe. And it works at millimeter and submillimeter wavelength, so more properly is a radio telescope. And it uses this trick of interferometry that you use multiple telescopes, and there are 64 reflectors like this. Each one is 12 meters in size. You can see the size of these antennas are huge, and there are 64 of them. And you can spread them around across an area of about, with a maximum distance of 15 kilometers. And this provides a resolution of 0.01 second of an arc at a wavelength of 1 millimeter, which is 10 milliarc seconds. So between 10 and 100 times smaller than the scale that we want to look at, which is this 1 arc second scale. So this has been in operation for a bit more than 7 years now, 8 years. And here at RISE, we try to make the best use of this. This, is, by the way, is a national facility. It's actually an international facility. And so it's a big and fancy and expensive camera, essentially, that allows you to take pictures of this forming planetary system. And these are 19 pictures of some object that we observed in the last couple of years. And so each of these objects is there is a baby star at the center that you don't see at millimeter wavelength, and it's good. And what you see, the color doesn't mean anything. Okay, we like to play around with color, but what matters is the intensity. So how bright are these images? So what you're looking at here is the emission at 1 millimeter that comes out from dust particles with sizes comparable to the wavelength. So solid particles of about 1 millimeter in size, like the sand dust, the dust particle, the sand you find on the beach. And the scale are comparable to that of the solar system. So what you are seeing here is this material that orbits around the star and comes together and forms somehow, in some way that we don't fully understand, form planets. Okay, I want to focus on one just as an example. It's one of my pet objects. It's called HD 163296. It's about 330 light years away from us, just to give you an idea. So this is our neighbor, what we call the solar neighborhood, well within our galaxy. And the age of this object and all the other objects is between 1 and 10 million years. We cannot date very well stars, but let's take 5 million years. As a comparison, the solar system is 4.5 billion years. So 5 million years for a star is really the infancy, okay? The star is at the center, it's still surrounded by this thick material. And so, and as I said, this color traces the density. Where it's brighter, it means you have more of these particles. And one of the key challenges in understanding the formation of planets is to understand how you go from here to here. Meaning, in regions like the Orion Nebula, is populated by these micron-sized particles, but somehow they come together and form Earth. So how is that process that encompasses many, many orders of magnitude happens? Okay, we don't know, so the answer is that we don't know, but the way we are trying to answer this is by looking at the behavior and the dynamic of these dust particles that are traced by this observation. And I'll tell you a bit more in the next couple of slides. Okay, so we are looking the sky at wavelength between 1 millimeter and sub-millimeter and centimeter. So if you know something about chemistry, and you also know that there are a lot of molecules, like water, for example, that they rotate. They have a rotational transition in this wavelength regime. So these telescopes are sensitive to this rotational transition of molecules. And this is just one. Unfortunately, it doesn't show up very well on this projector. But it's the same object as before, where these red rings are the same rings you see here. But now the green and the blue, they trace emission from carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is very common in the universe. It's cold. These regions are cold. And so the atom can come together and form molecules. So we can look at molecules like carbon monoxide. We can look at water, things like ammonia. And the key point is that we try to measure what are the ingredients in this disk. As I say, this is the reservoir for planet formation. If you want to make a cake, okay, you want to get a good cake, you better have good ingredients. So if you want to make a cake like Earth, we need some specific ingredient. We need water, we need nitrogen, and so forth. And depending where you form the planet around the star, you can get different cakes, okay? Because the ingredient, so the amount of elements and molecules depend on the distance from the star. So we can measure as a function of the distance where different planets form and what is the chemical composition of the material that form planet. Okay, one third point I want to touch briefly is that you may have noticed that these baby planetary systems, they all show these weird rings. These ones are elliptical because if you have a flat disk and you tilt it, then it will look like an ellipse, right, in the sky. But what are these rings? Why there are rings and it's not smooth, the emission? So this was, again, one of the main discoveries of this observation. And we think that these rings are created by baby planets like Jupiter. When planets form and become massive, what they do, they interact through gravity with the disk, and they carve and open up these big gaps. So we can use this structure to infer indirectly the presence of planetary system, planets like Jupiter planet in formation. Okay? So giant planets in the act of forming reshape the primordial disk. And we're starting now to understand that something like that may have happened in the solar system. So meaning that Jupiter may have a very fundamental role in shaping the solar nebula, what we call the solar nebula, which was the primordial disk around the sun, and maybe may have played a fundamental role in the formation of Earth, although we still don't connect all the dots together. So we see a lot of indirect evidence of baby planets. It's much more difficult now to try to directly detect this planet. And so far, we were able to directly detect this planet only in a handful of objects. So I'm going to show you one here. Again, this is one of my pet objects, PDS 70, 450 light years away, again, about 5 million years. These are ALMA observations that show this big ring made of dust particles. And the white smudges, these show the position of planets that were directly detected with optical observation. And we don't know exactly how massive they are, but we know they are very massive, something like between 1 and 10 times the mass of Jupiter. And we can do numerical simulation where we simulate in a computer the evolution of this system and show that indeed the presence of this planet will open up this big ring in the dust and gas. So this is one, when you put together observation with different telescopes, then you can have a full picture of the interplay between forming planets and disk. I want to conclude, I don't know my time, but I think I'm at the end. So I want to conclude the slightly changing subject in the sense that when we published this observation, this was picked up by national media. And what I want to convey here is that, I consider myself fortunate to study astronomy because we have this beautiful picture that really touches a lot of chords in the general public. Okay, I think astronomy is a fantastic tool to bring science into the general public, and God knows that we need that probably a lot, in particular in this period. And so it's really a powerful tool to reach out to the public and try also to get more support to get also funds for fundamental science. So I'll stop here, and I'll leave the microphone to Luay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming and for listening. I'm a computer scientist, so you will leave the talk not learning anything about the origin of life today. I was asked to talk about the origin of life, but again, I'm a computer scientist. I don't work on the origin of life. I work in the area of developing computational tools for phylogenetics, and phylogeny, in my opinion, is the tool that's going to allow us to study the origin of life. But I will talk about what are the challenges with trying to go back all this time to understand the origin of life. So the first, we have heard something about the universe, and basically the universe came into existence about 14 billion years ago. The solar system was formed about 4.6 billion years ago. And this is what I'm supposed to talk about now, the most recent period here. So about 4 billion years ago, that's when life started. And again, when I was asked to come give this talk, I said, what is life? I don't know, really, I don't know what the meaning of life is. So I started looking for that. And again, you have to do actually an operational definition of what life is. And one operational definition here is that it's everything that was alive at some point. And what does it mean to be alive? It can replicate, capturing energy from the environment. But if you look at this time scale here, again, the life started about 4 billion years ago. And we have this one here that's very important. It's called LCA, or the last common ancestor, or sometimes it's called LUCA, last universal common ancestor. Between these two periods here, this is where the people refer to the RNA world, where RNA came about, and RNA replication and all of that. But this is here where we started, where organisms, the way we know them, supposedly started here about 3.8 billion years ago. And now we are here. So what is the tool to go back and understand the origin of life? Again, we heard and saw beautiful pictures and videos about the universe and Hubble telescope and all of that. When you look at life, you don't have Hubble telescope for that. What we have today is a snapshot from life at one point, which is today. We can today get genomic data from humans, from chimp, from gorilla, from E. coli, from all species on Earth. And we want to try to go back from this snapshot, try to go back 3.8 billion years ago. And this is why the problem is computational. We don't have much more knowledge about it for these 3.8 billion years. And the biggest tool for us to understand this is really an old theory that came from Charles Darwin. And this is an excerpt from Charles Darwin's book where he talks about the tree of life. And I highlighted some words here that as buds give rise to, by growth, to fresh buds. And these, if vigorous, which is the issue of natural selection here and fitness, branch out. So this is where the tree structure starts coming about. And then at the end, we have all species on Earth related to each other from a common ancestor by this tree of life, the massive tree of life. And this is why we have these kind of pictures today, not as beautiful as what we saw before, this is the tree that, part of the tree that relates all species on Earth. So what you are seeing here on the outer ring are all species today, that we observe today. And this is the root here about 3.8 billion years ago. Okay? And this is where we have bacteria, archaea, eukaryotes, of course. We are selfish, we always put humans their special place, but there's nothing special about humans when you look at this. So I'm interested in trying to get at this picture. How do we get to this picture computationally when all we have is just data from here, right? So today, again, we can sequence genomes from these species on Earth and try to get from here to this point. So if you go back to the theory of Darwin, again, he gave the tool for trying to understand this, and his theory talks about descent with modification. Even though it talks about descent, biologists like to draw the tree like this, where the root is at the bottom and the leaves are at the top, okay? So descent is going this way here in this picture. And this is about 3.8 billion years ago, again, the last universal common ancestor. And this is present here. These are the tips of this tree, or the leaves of this tree, are where we have species like human is here, gorilla is here, and so on, right? And throughout time, these ticks here that are marking the branches of this tree, these are where changes or modifications are happening. So whenever you see a tick, some change is happening. At the morphology, in terms of the trace that you see in the species, or at the molecular level in the genomes, and so on. So phylogenetic inference, we are interested in the inference of this tree. So now you want to go back from the present all the way to the past, again, about 3.8 billion years. So this is really what we observe. Again, we don't have Hubble telescopes to look at the universe, and we don't know what, we are seeing something from this many million years ago or anything. We are seeing genomes today. You can look at my genome, and this genome really has been mutating and changing for 3.8 billion years, right? At some point, I was not human, right? But this is all we have, this observed data, and this is really what we want to infer. Right? So we have just one snapshot, and we want to infer 3.8 billion years of this branching pattern and changes and so on. So to try to get at this tree and to try to understand this evolutionary history, we have to collect data. This is here data that's what we call observed data or morphological data. Let's assume here it is about morphology or traits or something like presence and absence of feathers in species and how many fingers a species has and so on. So if you look at this here, I'm talking about, let's say, 4 species. And for each one of these 4 species, we collected data on 4 characters. Notice that there is correspondence among the characters. So character 1 in this species correspond to character 1 here, and so on. Then when you give me this, I can now look at it and say, based on similarity, if I look at these ones here, based on similarity, these two seem to be the closest to each other. They really differ only in character 4, the state of that character in terms of presence, absence of feathers, for example. That's the only difference they have, and so on. So based on this similarity, we can turn this into an algorithm, computer program that you give it data will give you this tree back. Okay? But the issue of similarity is that it doesn't work. Similarity works when you are looking at very, very small scale. When you look at something over 4 billion years, things will change back and forth that you will lose signal. So here I'm showing, actually illustrating 2 examples of what happens with this type of data. One is known as convergence, one is known as reversal. What happens with convergence is that we see changes to the same state in 2 different places in the tree of life. So 2 different species independently developed or evolved that trait along the tree of life. This is this case. Here this is a case where one ancestral species did not have a certain trait, 0. Then another species evolved that trait, has it. Then another one lost it. So this is reversal of the state. When you have these kind of events happening, similarity doesn't work now anymore, in the sense that when you look at the sequences that we have today from these species, their similarity does not reflect truly what happened here. And this is where the field moved away from this type of data. You cannot build tree of life based on similarity of these kind of sequences. But the good thing is that today we don't need that. We have molecular data, mainly genomic data. So today, again, you can get genomic data from all species, any species that you want to get genomic data from. The trees are built based on this molecular data. Morphology is usually analyzed with respect to that. It is not used to build it. And so this is the type of data that you will see today. This is, again, multiple species here, and every row you see here, it's a DNA sequence. Okay? So there are DNA sequences, and these dots here denote some particular patterns and so on. But this is the data that we collect today from different species. So here you have humans here, you have chimp, you have gorilla, you have mouse here, mus musculus is the mouse, and so on. So you can collect this data. This is the only data we have to try to go back all these 3.8 billion years. So if we want to get the tool to try to understand the origin of life, we have to be able to infer this tree of life. And again, to me, this is a computational question. Yes, the data is coming from biology labs, but the question is computational. We need the data, we need the model, we need an algorithm, we need the compute power. This is not an easy problem to solve. The data, we are getting there. So sequencing, this is here showing the price of sequencing of a genome, and you can see the drop in the price here. In 2001, it would cost about $100 million to sequence a genome. Today, it costs about $1,000 for a human genome to be sequenced. Okay, so this is allowing biologists to collect data on as many species as they want. And actually, this is much cheaper for bacteria and so on, depending on the size and complexity of the genome. So in terms of the amount of data or the data that we want to collect, it's becoming available, although very important question here is that once we collect all this data, is the signal still there to allow us to go back for 4 billion years? Okay, that's a different question from collecting the data. You can collect the data, but are you seeing enough changes and enough signal in these genomes, which are about billion letters, 3 billion letters, and so on? Are you seeing enough signal to be able to go back? But the data is getting there. However, one of the biggest challenges of trying to get there and to get at what Darwin was depicting, so this here, this small tree is what Darwin drew in his notebook, actually, and he wrote, I think. This is where actually the work on trees started, that trying to understand evolution and life by building the tree of life. The picture got much more complicated since Darwin. And this is why you'll see every now and then an article in the popular media talking about Darwin was wrong and so on. Darwin was not wrong. Darwin's theory was incomplete, and now scientists, the more we understand, the more it gets refined. But the issue that we understand today is that this tree, the tree that he drew as small lines, is really a cloud of branches. Within each branch here, you have another set of trees that are evolving. These are gene trees that are evolving within species tree. And when we have access to data, we really have access to data about these small branches inside the big tree. And these trees do not agree with each other. So this is where complexity starts to happening. You look at one gene, it tells you one story. You look at another gene, it tells you a different story. Why is that the case? Because of so many biological processes. Horizontal gene transfer happens a lot in bacteria. Bacteria share and exchange genes all the time. Incomplete lineage sorting, another process that has to do with population size and amount of divergence. Gene duplication and loss happens, and all of that. So now you are looking at, you try to understand evolution by building a tree, and then all of a sudden you end up with millions of trees on the same set of species. And we don't know which one is the species tree. And it gets much messier from there. When you look at the genomes, these are genomes of different bacteria, and try to map them to each other. Say this region resembles this and so on. This is the picture that emerges. They're shuffling all over the place in the genomes. So even trying to map them to each other is a very challenging task. And it just gets much more complicated from there with all sorts of biological processes that are discovered all the time acting on the genome. And it gets much worse because we keep talking about the tree of life, and it's not a tree of life. Every biologist actually knows that it is a network of life. There is a lot of these horizontal branches going on along across the tree. So it keeps adding, and complexity of this model keeps increasing more and more, while the genome still stays the same length, by the way. Okay? And this is another one here. Remember that the very first slide where I showed where life started, it was about 4 billion years ago. But that's not where the last universal common ancestor is. This is where the last universal common ancestor is. There were about 5.5 billion years here, that even if we build the tree of life or the network of life, we are not going to be able to get to the origin of life. We are going to get here, and this is where the RNA world was, and in my opinion, we cannot detect that with these trees. And then the last one here for computer scientists, we are, at the end of the day, you come up with the data, you come up with the model, but you need an algorithm to be able to infer this model. And the problem is just the complexity of the problem is enormous. that even if you look at tree of 80 species, only 80 species, there are 10 to the 139 possible trees on these 80 species. Now, I don't know if there is a name. There is no name for such number, right? But we are trying to build a tree on millions of species. So this is, again, shows you the enormity of the problem, and I would say that this is beyond the Google scale problem. So the phylogenetics and the tree of life are the tool to go back at the origin of life, but it's very complicated. I will just end with a couple of words here about, is phylogeny and evolution a scientific theory? Because once you build that tree, how do you know if it is true? How can we go back 4 billion years and try to validate that? So we know what some definitions of what is a scientific theory is that the scientific status of a theory is its falsifiability, refutability, or testability. And yes, evolution and phylogeny is a scientific theory. Fossil record has supported many of the inferences made, computer simulations, experimental evolution, where biologists are evolving species in the lab and trying to infer the evolutionary history. And of course, we have multiple independent sources of data that are supporting the inferences that are being made. And evolution is the unifying theory. I know physicists are still looking for a unifying theory there, but for biology, it is the unifying theory for biology. Evolution actually relates all species and all genomes, and everything that you look at in biology should be explainable by evolution. But a phylogenetic tree, and this is where we have to always be careful, a phylogenetic tree is a hypothesis. Whenever you build this tree and put it forth, it is a hypothesis. This is not a fact or a theorem that you can prove mathematically. Okay? And I think I have to say this because they didn't say anything controversial here, so I have to say something controversial. So I know that actually even here at Rice, I teach, I know so many students do believe in intelligent design and so on. And I keep thinking about how can I explain the difference between evolution and intelligent design, until one time I was teaching my course and I was teaching Bayes' theorem. And I said, here's the explanation for that. And I don't know how many of you know what Bayes' theorem is, but this is the only equation I will show here. So Bayes' theorem actually tells you that if you are a scientist, you are Bayesian in a sense. You start by looking at you with prior belief on a system or on a theory. Then you collect data or observations, as we saw also about the universe and so on. Then, if you are a scientist, open-minded scientist, you update your belief based on the data that you collected. And this is what Bayes' theorem says. It's basically the probability of a model, the posterior belief about the model comes from the prior belief and the likelihood of seeing the data we are seeing. This is Bayes' theorem. And in phylogenetics and evolution, really, we are continuously updating that. There's a prior belief. You can say that this is what Darwin believed, and this is where we started. We are now collecting genomic data and so on, and we are updating this all the time. Darwin was not wrong. It is being updated. With intelligent design, you look at the data, you ignore the data, and you update your belief to be the same as your prior belief. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have time for 2 questions, if there are any from the audience.
I actually have a question for our first 2 speakers. I have a question about the nature of sort of 4-dimensional space as we would intuitively think about it as humans that have just gone to high school or college, right? I've got an X, a Y, a Z, and a moment, right? And I can characterize the position of particles in this 4-dimensional space under this sort of very rudimentary model, right? So it's just like, as a casual human, at first glance, it seems like that the universe is a continuous space, right? If you give me any 2 distinct points in the space, I can give you a midpoint and we can play this game forever, right? But then we also learn about things like the Planck length and Planck time, which seem to discretize our observations in some way. So my question for you is that space, and we're thinking about sort of the possible positions of particles in space over all time, should we think of that set as countably infinite or uncountably infinite?
I think for all practical purposes, you should count it as uncountably infinite. There is the Planck length on any scale that we are talking about when we think of a particle. It's so small that to worry about this in a physics sense is not worthwhile. It doesn't give you any insight.
But what if we wanted to worry about an outside? Like, so let's say I wanted to make the argument that my proof that the universe is simulated is because there's only a discrete number of places in the universe.
So do we know, at the moment, I would say that we don't know that space or time is discretized. Okay, our ideas are that, yes, our understanding of space-time as it is as a classical theory should break down at the Planck scale, but our understanding of what happens there after that, we don't understand. So I think to say that it's discretized or not is difficult at the moment. The best understanding we have so far does seem to indicate that in some sense there is some countable number of states that you might have. Okay? But to say that it's actually discretizing space and time, we don't know yet. Okay.
Thank you for your speech. I have a question for Mustafa and Andrea. So do people have any data about the birth rate of the new stars during the evolution of the evolution of the universe? So if we have, is the rate faster or slower or constant than before?
Yeah, we do. So using the same trick that life propagated at finite speed, we can look back in time, a different time snapshot. And so we can look at galaxy at different ages and measure the star formation rate. And if you do that, you end up with a very famous plot in astronomy that shows star formation rate as a function of the age of the universe. And you find that at the beginning, star formation rate starts slowly and then it ramped up, and then it reached the peak of star formation, and now is slowing down again. So that's so it's kind of a bell shape, and now we are in the process that it goes down.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank our three speakers for wonderful lectures today.